Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Tech, AI, and Beyond. Thank you so much for joining us today. So, in our last deep dive, we really got into the weeds of the digital ecosystem, mapping out that whole complex world. Well, today, we're shifting gears a bit from the purely digital to the very, very physical. We're going to tackle one of the most complex and, frankly, urgent challenges of our time. We're diving headfirst into the green dilemma. It's this incredible story of technological promise, but it's also packed with these profound and often hidden paradoxes.
We've all seen the headlines, right? The incredible potential of green technology. And look, that promise is absolutely immense. A cleaner, more resilient world, all powered by human ingenuity. But if we believe that technology alone is the magic bullet, we're missing a huge and much more human part of the story. Because under the shiny surface of this green revolution, there are some deep, uncomfortable questions. Who's actually footing the bill for this massive shift? Whose backyards are being mined for the raw materials that power our electric future? And who, really, risks getting left behind in the dust of all this progress? So today, we're not just looking at the tech specs, we're asking the hard question. Is green progress always fair progress?
All right, so here's the game plan for today. First, we're going to tackle the green premium, basically why being sustainable can feel like a luxury. Then we're going on a journey deep into the global supply chain to uncover the true human and environmental cost of the minerals powering this whole thing. After that, we'll become detectives and learn how to decode greenwashing. And finally, we're going to talk about the critical need for a just transition, making sure no one gets left behind. Each piece builds on the last, so by the end, we'll have a really clear picture of this green dilemma. Okay, let's start with the first hurdle, the one that affects pretty much everyone right away. The cost. This is what we call the green premium challenge, and it's a really simple but profound problem. I mean, think about it. If the sustainable choice is only available to people who can afford to pay more, then it's not a real solution for everybody, is it? It ends up creating this two-tiered system, and that's just fundamentally not equitable. So what exactly is this green premium? Well, as you can see, it's that extra cash you pay for the eco-friendly option. But this isn't just some random markup. To get why it exists, you have to look at the economics. First, you've got massive R&D costs. I'm talking billions poured into perfecting things like hydrogen fuel cells, years before a single product ever gets sold. Second, there's the huge challenge of scale. I mean, fossil fuel industries have had a century-long head start building out their global supply chains. A modern oil refinery has an efficiency that a brand new sustainable aviation fuel plant just can't match yet. And third, you need staggering amounts of money for new infrastructure, a national network of EV fast chargers, for example. That investment has to be paid back, and you see that in the initial price tag. And this brings us to a really critical concept, something that's at the heart of environmental economics. The whole idea that fossil fuels are cheap is, well, it's an illusion. It's built on something called externalities. These are all the hidden costs, the public health damage from air pollution, the ecological harm from oil spills, the strain on our emergency services from climate-fueled disasters that are never, ever included in the sticker price. The company doesn't pay for it, you don't pay for it at the pump. Instead, we all pay for it, collectively, through our taxes, our insurance premiums, our healthcare bills. It's basically an accounting trick on a planetary scale.
This slide just lays it out perfectly. Let's take a gallon of gas. The price you see at the pump, that covers the basics: crude oil, refining, getting it to the station, and taxes. But what it doesn't cover are those externalities. It doesn't include the healthcare costs for the spike in childhood asthma in communities near highways. It doesn't include the multi-billion-dollar cleanup bill for a major oil spill. And as an environmental scientist, I can tell you, it definitely doesn't include the cost of our coral reefs dying from ocean acidification or farmers losing crops to climate-driven droughts. When you add all that up, that cheap gallon of gas is suddenly revealed to be incredibly expensive. Green tech, on the other hand, often costs more upfront, precisely because it internalizes those costs. An EV doesn't have tailpipe emissions, so it's not pushing those health costs onto the community.
So how in the world do we close this cost gap? Well, the answer lies in one of the most powerful forces in technology, something called the learning curve. And this number on the slide is just staggering, a 99% cost reduction. That's how much the price of solar panels has dropped since the 1970s. That is the learning curve in action. Basically, every time the total production of a technology doubles, its cost drops by a predictable amount. As we make more, we get smarter, manufacturing gets way more efficient, and the price just plummets. We're seeing this exact same thing happening right now with EV batteries and wind turbines. The whole key is using policy and investment to drive that early scale, to push us down that cost curve as fast as we possibly can.
And this is where policy becomes absolutely crucial. We can't just sit back and wait for the market to figure it out. Governments have to be accelerators. Things like subsidies and tax credits for EVs and solar, they've been essential for kickstarting those markets and getting them to the scale where costs start to fall. Public investment in big shared infrastructure, like a modernized grid, spreads the cost out so everyone benefits. But we also need really clever new models to tackle equity head-on. For instance, community solar projects, which are a brilliant idea, by the way, let people who rent or live in apartments buy a share in a local solar farm. And new things like green banks are popping up to offer low-interest loans to make sure the green revolution is a revolution for everyone, not just the wealthy.
Okay, so we've talked about the cost to the consumer, but now we have to go deeper. We have to go to the very beginning of the supply chain and ask a much tougher question about the human and environmental cost. You see, the green revolution is really a materials revolution. We're trading our dependence on fossil fuels for a whole new set of critical minerals, lithium, cobalt, nickel. But if our clean future is built on a foundation that's unsustainable and unjust, have we really made progress? Let's just zoom in on one of those minerals. Lithium. A lot of the world's lithium comes from South America's lithium triangle. And it's not mined from hard rock. It's extracted from ancient saltwater trapped deep underground. As you see here, the process involves pumping enormous amounts of this brine up into these massive evaporation ponds. Then for the next year and a half, the desert sun just bakes the water away, leaving the lithium behind. Here's the problem. This process uses a mind-boggling amount of water in one of the driest places on Earth. We're talking about 2 million liters of water to produce a single ton of lithium. That is draining the scarce aquifers that local indigenous communities have relied on for centuries. It's a direct and devastating conflict over water. Now, let's look at another critical battery mineral, cobalt. And when you look at this chart, wow, just let that number sink in for a second. Over 70% of the entire world's cobalt comes from one single country, the Democratic Republic of Congo. Now, for my background in computer networks, my alarm bells are screaming. This is a critical single point of failure. It creates massive fragility in the global supply chain. But far, far more importantly, it concentrates an enormous human rights crisis in one of the most vulnerable places on the planet. This quote it hits hard because it's true. While some cobalt comes from big industrial mines, a huge chunk of it, some estimates say up to 30%, comes from these informal artisanal mines. And the conditions there are just horrific. Miners, including tens of thousands of children, are digging by hand in tunnels that could collapse at any moment, with zero safety gear, constantly exposed to toxic metals. The whole system is plagued by corruption and exploitation, often fueling violent conflict. It's a trap, plain and simple. We're trapping the world's most vulnerable people in poverty and danger to get a key ingredient for the clean tech of the wealthy world. It is, without a doubt, the starkest moral dilemma we face. So, what's the fix? Well, it's not simple. It requires a systems-level approach, attacking the problem from multiple angles. First, we have to innovate. Chemists are in a race to design new batteries that use less or even zero cobalt. Lithium iron phosphate, or LFP batteries, are a great example, and they're already being used. Second, we have to get serious about building a circular economy. It is completely insane to mine these precious materials only to throw them in a landfill. We need advanced recycling that can recover up to 95% of these minerals to make new batteries. And third, we need radical transparency. And this is where tech I've worked with a lot, like blockchain, gets really interesting. By creating a secure, tamper-proof digital ledger, we can essentially build a digital passport for minerals. We can track them from a certified, responsible mine all the way to the final product and prove that it's free from conflict minerals or child labor. All right, this leads us perfectly into our third section, because as more and more people become aware of these issues and start demanding truly sustainable products, this really dangerous and deceptive trend has popped up: greenwashing. It's the art of using marketing spin to make a company or a product seem way more environmentally friendly than it actually is. It creates this fog of misleading claims that not only confuses us as consumers, but, even worse, it creates a false sense of progress that slows down the real work that needs to be done. Researchers have actually categorized the common tactics, calling them the sins of greenwashing. Let's just look at a few from the slide. The hidden trade-off is a classic. A car company brags about its recycled floor mats while totally ignoring the giant carbon footprint of the SUV they're in. Then you have the sin of vagueness. This is when you see those meaningless buzzwords like eco-friendly or all-natural that have absolutely no scientific or regulated definition. The sin of no proof is making a claim like made with 50% recycled plastic, but offering zero data or certification to back it up. And my personal favorite, the sin of irrelevance, like proudly advertising that your product is CFC-free. Great.
except CFCs have been banned by international law for decades. Once you learn to spot these tricks, you start seeing them everywhere.
So how do we fight back against this marketing fog? Well, it takes a two-pronged attack. First, on the consumer side, we have to get more critical. We have to look past the pretty green packaging and demand the details. Data, real certifications from credible third parties like B Corp, Fair Trade, or the Forest Stewardship Council. These groups do the hard vetting work for us. But individual action alone can't police a global market. That's why we also need strong, clear government regulation. The European Union is really leading the charge here with new rules that will force companies to fully prove their green claims with hard data. That's the kind of systemic change we need to level the playing field. This brings us to our final dilemma. And honestly, it might be the most socially complex of them all: ensuring a just transition. See, the green energy transition is, by its very nature, an act of disruption. For every new job we create building wind turbines, there's a risk of a job lost in a coal mine. This shift is absolutely necessary for our climate, but we have a profound moral obligation to manage it in a way that's fair for the workers and communities whose entire way of life was built on the old energy economy. The whole idea of a just transition recognizes a really fundamental truth. For places like Appalachia or Germany's coal regions, the fossil fuel industry isn't just a bunch of jobs. It's the tax base that funds schools and hospitals. It's a source of well-paying, often union employment. And it's a deep part of a community's identity, sometimes going back generations. If you manage that transition poorly, you don't just get unemployment, you can tear the entire social fabric of a region apart, leaving behind devastation and a deep resentment that can last for decades. A successful just transition can't be an afterthought. It has to be a central part of climate policy from day one. And it's built on a few key pillars. First, you have to proactively invest in new sustainable industries in those same regions. Build a battery factory on the site of an old coal plant. Second, you need massive, sustained funding for worker reskilling and education, designed with local unions and colleges. Third, you have to provide real social safety nets, wage insurance, healthcare support, things like that. And finally, and this might be a most important part, you have to empower local communities in the planning process. This cannot be a top-down plan from some distant capital city. It has to be built in partnership with the people whose lives it will affect the most. So let's just pull all these threads together. The road to a sustainable future, it's not some simple, smooth superhighway. It's a tough, complex landscape filled with some really big challenges. We've talked about the green premium, which risks making sustainability a luxury. We've looked at the dark side of where our minerals come from and the fact that our clean tech can't be built on suffering. We've learned how to see through the deceptive fog of greenwashing. And we've embraced the moral need for a just transition so we don't leave people behind. And that really brings us to the core idea, the central thesis of this entire discussion today. These challenges, cost, ethics, equity, they are not arguments against going green, not at all. They are the very issues we have to solve to make the transition work, to make it last, and to make it morally sound. They're the design specs for building a better system. A truly sustainable future has to be an equitable one. The two are just fundamentally inseparable. The one big takeaway I really want you to leave with is this. As technologists, as engineers, as innovators, we can't let pure technological progress be our only measure of success. Yeah, the efficiency of a solar cell is a critical data point, but so are the working conditions in a cobalt mine. So are the solar adoption rates in a low-income neighborhood. These are not side issues. They are absolutely central to the whole project. Progress that comes at the expense of justice and human rights isn't really progress at all. And so I'll leave you with this final question to think about, because it really captures the whole challenge of the green dilemma. It's not enough anymore to ask if we can build a green future. The tech and the science tell us we absolutely can. The much more important and much harder question is how. How do we build a future that isn't just green, but is also fair? The how of this transition, how we get our materials, how we price our products, how we treat people, is every bit as important as the what we end up building. Answering that question, the how, that is the great challenge of our generation. In our next deep dive, we're going to explore those solutions in a lot more detail when we look at the engine of change, policy, tech, and global collaboration. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this, please subscribe, like, and share, and don't forget to hit the bell for more from Tech AI and beyond.